Oh, I wanted to show you some of the UK. The UK is having a leadership debate among the ruling Conservative Party.
How would you immediately ease the unprecedented cost of living crisis? Rishi Sunak.
Absolutely nothing. That's what I would do.
And Liz Truss.
What I would do immediately is harm people and businesses.
Thank you. Penny Mordaunt.
Where we really need to concentrate is on taking too much money off struggling families.
Thank you. Kemi Bailey.
I want a terrible future for our children, flipping burgers and cleaning toilets.
Thank you. Tom Tugendhat.
I think what we need to do is we need to focus on Keir Starmer.
What about you as a person would make you a better Prime Minister?
I'm the only person who has my wife's family's wealth.
I'm somebody who gets wasted. That's why I became a Conservative.
I have 3 children.
Well done. I have managed to attract a washing machine.
Can I ask, how would you stop the strikes?
I do have a plan, and it involves 2 young girls, and that's the way to do it.
The first job of any Prime Minister is to clobber people.
Right. My question's for Liz, actually. Liz, what is the point in the Conservative Party?
It's taking money out of people's pockets.
Who here would be happy to have Vladimir Putin in their cabinet?
I'm the person that can do that.
They ruined it with Vladimir Putin at the end. They ruined it with Vladimir Putin in the end. The British have been warmongering like crazy in Ukraine. Like, I mean, you can't even be more to the right than the British Conservative Party in the Ukraine war. Like, give me a fucking break. All right, chat. I can't do it. I can't read this. I was planning on it, and I've been like sitting here on the other monitor like, should I do it? Should I do it? Should I read it? Should I read it? The white liberals' burden. It's so long. It's so long. Let me just read a couple things. All right? Let me read a couple things. And then the conclusion. Let me just read a couple things. Maybe if you guys don't maybe if you guys don't give me enough money tomorrow, you know, we don't hit the sub goal, I might read this whole thing to torture you all. But unexpectedly, white people benefited materially from the end of apartheid. Thanks in part to the lifting of foreign sanctions, the average income of white households increased 15% during Nelson Mandela's presidency, far more than black incomes did. White business people started to export wine and $10,000 ostrich leather sofas to Europe, and white-run safari lodges welcomed a flood of new tourists. In many ways, white life remained more or less untouched because capitalism is fucking racist. Capitalism in South Africa, unless you redistributed wealth, which they didn't do, was going to proceed the same way. It's the same way that white people have the money in the South today. It's why black people have less wealth in America today. It's not because the law says black people are inferior. It doesn't say that. But you have history that happened. You had material reality. If you lived in a mansion, the next day you still own that motherfucking mansion. If you own thousands of acres of land, the next day after apartheid, you still owned that 1,000 acres of land. Unless you take the ill-gotten gains, capitalism perpetuates itself. Duh! A startling number of formerly anti-apartheid white people began to voice bitter criticisms of post-apartheid society. Many white South Africans told me that black forgiveness felt like a slap in the face. By not acting toward you as you acted toward us, we're showing you up, white South Africans seemed to hear. You owe us a debt of gratitude forever. They're complaining that they got forgiven! One white friend and former anti-apartheid activist told me that after the Truth and Reconciliation Commission publicized much of what black South Africans had faced under apartheid, she felt humiliated to recall what she and other friends had once considered resistance, gestures like having a warm exchange with a black maid or skipping class to join an anti-apartheid march. Oh, I had a warm exchange with the help! I'm so progressive! Liberals! She said that a sense of embarrassment made her stay away from politics, as did the slow dawning recognition that black people, many of whom had worked in white people's houses under apartheid, knew much more about the lives of white people than white people knew about black lives. My friend had never even seen the inside of a black person's home. In South Africa? She just had 2 white socialists getting owned by a black girl. That's in the article! That's in the article! I didn't want to read it to you because it's too stupid. She said, I've been in California. It's less racist than South Africa. Who gives a fuck? First of all, bullshit. Second of all, this is the end. I can't read more of this. But the Africana journalist Ria Malan, who opposed apartheid, has written that by most measures, its aftermath went better than almost any white person could have imagined. But as with most white progressives, his experience of post-1994 South Africa has been complicated. A few years after the end of apartheid, he moved to an upscale Cape Town neighborhood. Most mornings, he drank macchiatos in an upscale seaside cafe. The kind of cosmopolitan place that, thanks to sanctions, had hardly existed under apartheid. The sea is warm and the figs are ripe, he wrote. He also described this existence as unbearable. He just couldn't forgive black people for forgiving him. Paradoxically, being left undisturbed served as an ever-present reminder of his guilt, of how wrongly he had treated his maid and other black people under apartheid. Progressive maid! Racial maid! I'm a progressive, but I had an apartheid maid! Incredible. The Bible was right about a thing or two, he wrote. It is infinitely worse to receive than to give, especially if the gift is mercy. Holy fucking hell. Liberals. I can't read more of this. You heard him. He wants the guillotine, not reform. Hey, I'm only giving him what he wants, okay? Absolutely insane. Liberals are really fucking. AJ Plus has a really nice piece on the cops. Let's watch this. Let's react to this, huh?
You know who could kill you right now and most likely get away with it and would probably get the support of most of the news media? A cop.
The average American, the most powerful person they will ever interact with is the local police officer, because that officer, every single one of those officers, has the power to pull out a gun and kill them. Donald Trump couldn't do that. Joe Biden can't do that. Every single sworn American police officer has the right and the power to do that.
The police form a foundational part of how the news functions in this country. Crime today is arguably the bedrock of news reporting. Without crime, without the police, it's hard to imagine what the bulk of the news at both the national and local levels would look like.
If a program like Stop and Frisk is abandoned, will people die?
Well, I think, no question about it, violent crime will go up.
Just ahead on efforts by some big cities across the country to rein in aggressive police tactics while violent crime is on the rise.
All this going on as police are facing tougher situations when responding to emergencies.
Or even so much of our entertainment industry, which since the 1970s especially has relied on the police and on the fear of crime and the morbid fascination with it to pull audiences in. And so as we find ourselves in the midst of another media zeitgeist about increasing crime, it begs the question, is all of this, the foundational nature of the police and crime in our news and entertainment industries, just a natural part of how this all works? That people just want to know what to watch out for and what criminals lurk in their neighborhoods? Or has all of this been by decades of design? Does our news coverage of crime and the police function in service of the institution of the police? Does it just simply fearmonger about crimes that have the smallest impact on the larger collective?
Yeah, right.
And are we, in the process, allowing dishonest coverage to dictate the direction of policy that addresses crime in this country?
I've said it before. The answer is not to defund our police departments. It's to fund our police and give them all the tools they need.
Welcome to Backspace, where we tell you how the story is told in the headlines, and then we think about how we can tell it a little differently. Reverence of the police in this country is arguably exceptional. The American police, as lone officers and as an institution, receive a glorification that's almost on par, maybe in some cases more so, with that of the military.
In the mind and the imagination of the average American, the police officer is the white knight, is the person in uniform who is here to maintain order, to protect, to save. They're the hero of the story. And that's an image and a reputation that's been burnished by decades, going on centuries, of popular culture and mass media portrayal, where we as Americans truly believe and want to believe in the police officer as the good guy.
The bad guys don't stand a chance.
That kind of respect, reverence could be fine if it didn't give police unquestioned authority to dictate the terms of their own existence, their abuses, and the occurrence of crime in this country. And that's nowhere more apparent than in our news coverage, which reveres the authority of the institution of the police.
We know you back the blue, but do you back the blue's budget?
Former Mayor Rudy Giuliani increased the number of police officers by 20%. Crime and homicide rates dropped to record lows. He was able to do this in large part to government funding.
When you have crime on the rise, you got to do something to counter that. So the police tactics and things that the police have to do to bring the order back to it has to increase.
Let us roll up our sleeves to roll back this awful tide of violence and reduce crime in our country.
This type of reporting, which kowtows to the authority and power of the police, privileging police narratives about itself, its individual members, and about crime, has been referred to as propaganda. News that serves as PR or propaganda for police departments and the interests of the police. It's not just about how the police themselves are reported on, but also how which crimes are reported on, who is used as a source, and what solutions are offered.
I think there are really three main functions of propaganda. First is it's designed to make us panicked and afraid of all of the types of very particular crimes that police enforce. The second function of propaganda is once it narrowly constrains our understanding of what is related to our safety, it narrowly constrains what we think of as threats to our well-being. Its role is to make us think that those threats are constantly increasing. The third very important primary function of propaganda is it suggests that police, prosecutors, and prisons are the solution to that.
So what does it look like in day-to-day news coverage? It looks like the repetition of phrases like officer-involved shooting.
An officer-involved shooting.
Officer-involved shooting.
Officer-involved shooting.
Officer-involved shooting.
Officer-involved shooting. Propaganda looks like using sources in a story that are either just the police or were once part of the police.
It's one of the only genres of journalism in which we're totally fine with a single source. And we take that information and apply no pressure to it, despite the fact that we know that police very often just get basic facts wrong.
And they frequently lie.
Talk to an expert. It's often someone who used to be a cop or used to be a prosecutor. Sometimes they'll interview the corporate PR executives from, Walgreens or CVS or something like that. But very, very rarely do they include critical perspectives. And if they do include critical perspectives, they'll be buried at the bottom of an article.
There's also how victims of police violence are reported on versus the police perpetrators of that violence, with the most infamous example being the 2014 killing of 18-year-old Ferguson resident Michael Brown by former police officer Darren Wilson. Brown was routinely characterized as an aggressor, whereas Wilson was consistently humanized and presented as the victim. We can also look at how the police have been covered in the last 2 years since the George Floyd protest erupted in May 2020. There was an obsession with the slogan, defund the police, a summary of a policy meant to take funds from bloated police budgets and put them toward mental health and social work services. Instead, we got fear-mongering about how anarchy would ensue, which, of course, led to the further bloating of police department budgets. Propaganda is also built on how crime itself is reported on, specifically which crimes are worth mentioning again and again, and which barely make a blip on the nightly news.
Tonight, facing rising crime across the country, President Biden's under pressure to do more.
Cities across the country are facing a dramatic rise in carjackings.
I spoke with the police chief about his plans to address crime in 2022.
I'm just curious, is Eric Adams going to be able to do anything while he's obviously surrounded by elected officials who want New York to remain chaotic?
Things like illegal eviction and illegal air.
That is the left-wing network. Surrounded by elected officials who want New York to remain chaotic. Guy who doesn't... are you fucking kidding me, dude?
Water pollution kill orders of magnitude more people. I mean, each of those things is associated with mass death in this country, particularly death of poor people, but in the case of air and water pollution, death, cancer, illness, and injury at a massive scale. And you don't see daily beats where reporters are talking about substandard living conditions or workplace safety violations or companies spewing toxic things into the air or the water, which are actually killing people.
None of those things mentioned by Alec register as crime in our minds, right? For most of us, air pollution isn't a crime. It's a nuisance. Maybe at worst, it's a bad policy. Undrinkable water isn't a crime, right? It sucks. It's horrible. But no one is currently sitting in prison for knowingly letting the residents of Flint, Michigan drink water poisoned with lead. Tens of millions of Americans, rural, indigenous, black, poor, are drinking contaminated water, but that doesn't register in our collective minds as criminal. And that's because of how we've been conditioned to think of crime, specifically what the FBI calls index crimes. These 8 crimes, which the FBI argues are the most common crimes, have annual data collected on them, meaning they're the ones we know and hear about the most. And so crime like auto theft, homicide, rape is an individual occurrence. That's how we end up thinking about crime. We don't think about systems or infrastructures of finance, housing, public health when we think about crime. We don't think about detrimental policies that create conditions that lead to those smaller crimes. We don't think about how the crime we hear the most about is the crime committed mainly by those from disadvantaged communities when there's no shortage of it in richer and more powerful segments of American society. So why is this happening? Well, a large part of it is that institutions that command authority uphold other institutions that command authority.
The media is collectively a power broker. We benefit from symbiotic relationships with other institutions. We have a vested interest, often in the success of those institutions. And so because of that,
that's why you don't see the media is not going to call for any kind of reform of the Supreme Court, no matter what the Supreme Court does. If the Supreme Court rules that you can't have minimum wage or child labor laws, the media of this country is not going to say, "Oh, this is unbelievable. To have children first to work? Unconscionable." No. They'll have think pieces about how it's actually good. SDJ, 1985. Thanks for the prime.
Often it undercuts the ability of the media to truly hold police departments accountable.
In addition to the visceral respect for the authority held by the police institution by the media, there are also the concerted efforts by police departments to cultivate relationships in newsrooms and control narratives involving them.
The Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department, for example, has 42 full-time employees dedicated to manipulating the news and media information. The Los Angeles Police Department has another 25 full-time cops devoted to manipulating the news and shaping narrative and working with journalists on stories. That's not even counting all the other cops in those bureaucracies who spend time doing media relations work and the outside contracts they have with PR firms.
And they're far from alone. Police departments across the country have invested in public relations or media affairs departments, as well as strategizing for decades on how to better control media coverage.
There was then an exchange of gunfire between the suspect and
3 Boise police officers were involved.
Phoenix police saying
officers gave several commands to Brown to drop the gun before he pointed the firearm at officers.
He said he was a ninja and he was going to kill them.
They tried to de-escalate the situation.
He then began to move more quickly and lunged toward Officer Segura.
And they shot at him when he lunged at them.
I mean, like, honestly, this should be banned. There shouldn't be in-house media at the police. This is ridiculous.
2 individuals finally jumped out of the car. They ran off into the blocks
and fired a shot that hit a police vehicle.
A scare at the mall that could have ended in tragedy.
The suspect was arrested, in custody, and safe.
Given the baked-in reverence the media has for government institutions, which includes the police, and given the amount of money police departments have put into controlling the narratives around themselves, is better coverage even possible? Is it possible to reform something so tightly sewn together, the media and the police? Let's start with the most obvious way, how we ourselves as consumers of the news can engage with police and crime stories. And that starts with considering why we're being told the specific stories we're being told and who's telling those stories.
It's vital to understand when consuming news that there's certain stories that powerful people want us to know and there's certain stories that they don't want us to know. And everything else follows from that.
Then consider the story itself, the narrative that's being pushed forward.
Follows from that.
Then consider the story
This is the
itself,
important point.
the narrative that's being pushed forward, and how it aligns with what other sources tell us. For instance, so much national and local news coverage since 2020 in particular has focused on a, quote, rise in crime, yet ignored what may be an aggravating factor. Overall, crime is low. Yes, there's been a rise in violent crime like homicide and aggravated assault, but it's also increasing at a slower rate. But coverage of crime tends to ignore and erase root causes of crime, specifically crimes committed within or by those from underprivileged neighborhoods. The main driver of crime, especially violent crime, is income inequality. It's poverty. It's also the criminalization of poverty. Rarely do newsrooms make the connection between rising crime rates and increasing poverty, or between rising crime rates and the sort of crimes that are primarily prosecuted, crimes that tend to focus on the wrongdoings of the poor. Newsrooms need to reprioritize their understanding and engagement with crime, not just the structural issues at the root of crime, which can be fixed.
Well, a lot of people like to watch trashy, what they perceive as trashy content, right? They want to look down. They like classist shit. They want to see poor people living worse lives than them. They enjoy that. That's part of their appeal. Is there is a sadistic streak in our species? I think we all have it. Very few people don't have this, sadistic streak towards someone that they deem to be worthy, right? So, like, for a lot of people, they like to see homeless people suffer. They like to see poor people. They like to see drug addicts. They enjoy that. They enjoy watching those people suffer.
But also consider bad policies and bigger crimes that are creating conditions that generate smaller crimes.
One of the things that we constantly see with the news is a portrayal of every problem as it has to find someone whose fault it is. It has to find someone to blame, someone who's a bad person, right? Instead of actually asking, how are these systems designed to inevitably lead to these outcomes?
If all we're hearing is that crime is increasing and simultaneously that there's a war on the police by the so-called radical left, then the solutions offered won't be those rooted in fact, but emotion brought on by fear-mongering. And it then becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. Beyond re-examining how journalists engage with crime and how they deliver it in a very myopic way driven by class assumptions of what is noteworthy crime and what isn't, at the most basic level, newsrooms need to fact-check police narratives. The police are, to put it politely, far from an innocuous and objective bystander witnessing crime. They benefit from fear around crime. It means more funding. It means relevancy. Newsrooms, local and national, also need to re-examine their relationships with police departments. Public information officers are PR agents. Their job is to control the narrative, not to give objective facts. The police should not be at the center of the stories they are a part of.
It's our job to try to figure out what's true and what is not. And so often things that American police say crumble under the lightest amount of scrutiny.
Much like how it is difficult to reform the institution of the police, reverence for the institution and its authority by the media also faces a similar difficulty. There's an inextricable link there, a symbiotic relationship that feeds the other what the other needs. The news media needs attention-grabbing stories, and the police need the public case to constantly be kept around and empowered. But if, as journalists, we stumble when it comes to holding any institution of power accountable to the public, then what are we doing exactly? Because our current coverage of crime, of police, seems less like punching up to power and more like holding up the abuse of power. And scene. Thanks so much for watching, everyone. We do have a few more episodes left in this season of Backspace, and so we want to hear from you as to what you want us to cover. Let us know in the comments, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, and we will see you.
In my country, the police are considered by law an unbiased source that journos don't fact check? By law? What country's that?
Soon.
Pretty good. Pretty good vid. Give them a like. Throw them a like, chat. Give them a subscription. Are you watching the stream unsubbed? You're making income inequality worse. You are doing anti-praxis. We are the only Twitch stream that will not accept scam advertisers, and I will never fuck you over by selling you crap.